This is a quick overview of exponents. We're going to start with multiplying exponents. So when you are multiplying exponents, so for example, you have x to the third power times x to the second power. One way to approach it would be to expand both expressions. So x to the third power would be x times x times x. X to the second power would be x times x, and then count how many x's we have altogether. Well, for us, we have 5 x's, so this would be x to the fifth power. Now, if we were to do this every single time, that would take way too long, and the higher the power on the x, the longer it would take to expand. Therefore, we have created a rule that we can follow to make it a little bit simpler. So x to the third times x to the second is the same as x to the power 3 plus 2, so x to the fifth. We're going to follow this particular rule and a couple of more examples. So here's the first one, and we'll do x to the fourth power times x to the third power. Well, that is the same as x to the power 4 plus 3, so x to the seventh power. Now, if we have numbers attached to the x's, then we just have to multiply the numbers together and then add the powers on the x's together. So 5x to the fifth times 4x to the third, let's say. So that would be 5 times 4, and then x to the power 5 plus 3. So this is 20x to the eighth power. This is multiplication. Now, with division, instead of adding the exponents, we usually subtract them. So, for example, let's start with this one again, x to the third over x to the second. You could expand things just like we did in the first example, x times x times x in the numerator, and then x times x in the denominator. Now then, in general, we cancel the x on the top with the x on the bottom, then another x on the top with the x on the bottom, and what we have left is just one single x. Now, once again, it takes way too long to do that if you were to do this for every single problem. So instead, we have created a rule, x to the third divided by x to the second. It is the same as x to the power 3 minus 2, which is just x to the first power, or x. So let's try that on a couple of more examples. So let's say we have x to the fifth power divided by x to the third power. That is x to the power 5 minus 3, or x squared. Now, what happens if we flip the x to the third and the x to the fifth places? So x to the third goes on top and x to the fifth goes on the bottom. Well, then you would have x to the power 3 minus 5, which is x to the negative 2 power. Now, that is the correct answer, but it's not written in the correct format. Usually, when we're working with exponents, we want our answers to just have positive powers. No negative exponents are generally allowed as a mathematical answer, unless you're specifically looking for negative exponents. So in order to turn this x to the negative 2 power into an x with a positive exponent, all you have to do is put it in the denominator of a fraction. So 1 goes into the numerator and x squared goes into the denominator. Okay, let's try this one more time and we'll add some letters to this. Also some numbers to this. 8 over 4, and on the top, let's do x to the 6, and on the bottom, we'll do x to the 10th. So first of all, you're going to deal with the numbers. 8 over 4, well, you could reduce the fraction like you generally do. In this case, we would be dividing both top and bottom number by 4 because that is the greatest factor that they have in common. 8 divided by 4 is 2. And then 4 divided by 4 is 1. Now on the x's, that would be x to the power 6 minus 10. So this would be 2. 2 over 1 is the same as 2. 2x to the power negative 4. And once again, we have to rewrite it as 2 divided by x to the 4th. All right. And the last thing we're going to look at is the powers of exponents. And that is when you have an exponent and you have to put it to another power. And that would be something like this, x squared and then cubed. In this case, we are going to multiply the exponents. So x squared and then cubed is the same as x squared times x squared times x squared, which is x to the power 2 plus 2 plus 2, which is x to the 6th. And just like before, we have created a rule that we are following here. X squared and then cubed would be the same as x to the power 2 times 3. So x to the 6th power. One more example on this. So let's do something like this. Example, let's add a number in front. So let's do 5x to the 4th power and then squared. That would be 5 squared times x to the 4 times 2, which is 5 squared is 25, and then x to the 8th power. This concludes a very brief overview of exponents.